Welcome, everyone. My name is Quentin Goodbody. I'm president of the Ladysmith District Historical Society. Welcome to our Historically Speaking talk series. Our speaker today is Robert Lawson. Robert has an affinity for the finer things of yesteryear. He's notable for driving his vintage 1916 Franklin car about town during the summer months, and for his lifelong love affair with wooden boats. Robert's had a hand in restoring a number of iconic craft, including the skiff from the HMCS Rainbow, built sometime probably during the 1890s, which now resides in Ladysmith Maritime Society's floating museum nearby. So it's no surprise that Robert has a significant hand in the ongoing restoration of the Dorothy, the subject of tonight's talk. You'll see that not only is Robert an accomplished shipwright or carpenter, but he's also an extremely knowledgeable and meticulous maritime researcher and historian. Robert, thank you for being here to present to us this evening. I'll turn the floor over to you for a few comments.
The talk this evening is about the early years of Dorothy, with a lot of historical information that most people haven't seen before, even people who have known Dorothy for a long time. So hopefully it will be of interest to you all. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Robert Lawson, and I'm leading the crew of volunteers completing the refit of the yacht Dorothy in the car shop for the Maritime Museum of BC. Hopefully, this slide presentation will give an interesting overview of her early history as the oldest still surviving sailboat built in British Columbia. In 1894, Mr. E. Gould, a noted English yachtsman, commissioned Linton Hope, a prolific designer of the Thames Yacht Building Company, to design a fast 30-foot craft for shallow waters, such as in the Thames estuary, that was to be easily handled by one person. A design was produced, named Dorothy, and built to the highest standard of the day and proved to be a great success. The design was published in 1895 in the revised edition of Dixon Kemp's Manual of Yacht and Boat Sailing. Half a world away in the fledgling yachting community of Victoria, BC, W.H. Langley, a local barrister, saw the design in Kemp's book and decided that he would like to have a similar boat himself. I will be discussing this evening the consequences of his decision and how Dorothy came to be built. This is a similar yacht called Dorothy, which was recently sold for a significant sum by Sandeman Yachts in England. For many years, it was thought to be the first version of Dorothy, built in 1894, but recent research concludes that this is not the case. It was built by the Thames Yacht Building Company and designed by Linton Hope in 1894, but it is not the Dorothy that Linton Hope designed and built for Mr. E. Gould. It was built for Mr. Lawson of Mayfair as a Thames raider and is virtually identical in dimensions to this drawing of a larger boat by Linton Hope, published in his book, Yacht Construction. The original Dorothy, built from the same plans as W.H. Langley used in 1897, has vanished from history. First of all, sources. Where to find information about Dorothy's early days. In the late 1970s, when Dorothy was owned by Angus Matthews, he was tied up to the dock at Salt Spring Island one evening, when an older lady came down the dock carrying a largish package wrapped in an old sailcloth and tied up with twine. She stopped by the boat and asked if this was the Dorothy. Angus replied that yes, it was, and she handed him the package, saying, "Well then, you should have this," and walked away. It turned out, upon opening, to contain early handwritten correspondence with Linton Hope concerning Dorothy's design and later correspondence concerning sales and other issues. It contained bills and invoices from Victoria and English suppliers for all manner of things to do with the fitting out of the vessel, and 2 log books in Langley's hand, one reconstructed log of her early days, as the original was lost in a fire at Langley's office in 1908. There is also a maintenance log covering the years from 1928 to 1944. This was indeed a treasure trove of information that very few boats of this age would ever be able to access now, and gives a fascinating glimpse into a time long ago. This trove is now safely stored in the archives at the Maritime Museum of British Columbia. Other sources included Linton Hope's book, published in 1902, on small yacht construction, filled with interesting details, plans, and illustrations of marine hardware. This is an extremely rare book, and yet turned up this summer in Bellingham for the princely sum of $25. The other volume is Lloyd's Register of Yachts for 1912. This was an annual publication that was supplied by subscription for the sum of £1 per annum. If you were a yacht owner and registered with Lloyd's, you received this volume filled with information on every yacht in commission, as well as lists of builders and owners and flags, and is a mine of useful information from the pre-digital age. This is the 8th edition of Dixon Kemp's book, a manual of yacht and boat sailing, published in 1895. It is a large volume filled with vast amounts of information about sailing and owning yachts, and various fold-out plans with designs and discussions of all sorts of different kinds of boats. The picture on the right is the fold-out plan of Linton Hope's design, Dorothy, which is where Langley first saw her drawings. What little we know of the first Dorothy is contained in this small header note for the drawings in Kemp's book. The single-handed cruiser Dorothy. The design of the single-hander Dorothy, plate 94, was also in the London Sailing Club competition and had the highest certificate of merit awarded. She was designed and built by Mr. Linton Hope, Greenhithe, Kent, in 1894 for Mr. E. Gold, and is wonderfully well thought out. She proved a staunch, fast, and good seaboat, and has done quite a record amount of cruising about the estuary of the Thames in all kinds of weather. Full particulars of the design and internal arrangements will be found on plate 94. The following 5 slides are the original drawings of Dorothy, prepared by Linton Hope and published by Dixon Kemp. As you can see from this profile drawing, she is a relatively shallow draft with a large centerboard and 1 ton of external lead ballast, with a slot through which the centerboard fits. It has 2 berths in the main cabin with a table over the top of the centerboard case, and a very unusual cockpit, with a wide sliding hatch that covers the entire cockpit, allowing for a further 2 berths to be placed there. Up forward, there is a berth for a boy and a chain locker. The body plan shows an easily driven hull with V sections and shallow draft. This drawing shows a section of the cabin midships, looking fore and aft. Looking forward, on the right-hand side, shows a berth with curved panels against the hull, a small locker, and the fold-out table mounted on the centerboard case. On the left, looking aft, it shows a cockpit seat, the door to the sail locker in the stern, and the companionway steps. You can see more clearly the centerboard case and how wide the keel is, and the shape of the lead keel with the slot for the centerboard. The half-breadth plan shows the beautiful lines of the hull, which represent the culmination of centuries of refinement and perfecting a sailing boat that is fast and handy. The deck and cabin plan shows the arrangement of berths, the cupboard, and the folding table that we saw in the previous illustration. You can see quite clearly the extra wide hatch that covers the cockpit when the boat is anchored. It is unknown if the original Dorothy was built with this arrangement, but it certainly didn't suit W.H. Langley, as he had a more traditional style cockpit built in Victoria. This is the sail plan. This type of rig is known as a gunter rig. The difference between a gunter rig and a gaff rig is the length of the boom and its shape. The gunter holds much more tightly to the mast, and the peak of the sail is much higher than with a regular gaff rig, thus giving the boat, at least theoretically, better performance to windward. Gunter rigs were used successfully in smaller boats as they were easily stowed when not sailing. Dorothy is about the upper size limit for successfully using a gunter rig. Another interesting feature is the furling jib. Furling jibs became popular in the late 19th and early 20th century, but they were usually set flying with no stay to support the luff of the jib. However, Lytton Hope designed a combination furling drum and wooden roller, which is much like the aluminum foils of today's modern sailboats, which is set over a stay and thus allowed the luff of the jib to remain tight when the boat was sailing. In 1894, W.H. Langley, a young barrister in Victoria, commissioned T.C. Jones to build an 18-foot, very modern design sailing yacht, which he named Viola. He liked to race against other yachts in the inner harbor, but soon found that Viola wasn't fast enough for his tastes, which led him to search for the design of a larger vessel that he could race and cruise in the summer season. These two photos show Viola on a carriage at T.C. Jones's yard at the foot of Montreal Street, and Viola at anchor in the inner harbor in 1897 or 1898. These are two trophies, one by W.H. Langley and his yacht Viola in the years before Dorothy's construction. As yacht racing and rules were evolving in Victoria, it is interesting to see she was initially classed as an A-class boat. But by the time she won the third prize, she was now classed as a D-class boat. When Dorothy was built, she ended up being designated as a B-class sloop. When W.H. Langley found the plan for Dorothy in Dixon Kemp's book, instead of purchasing for the sum of 15 guineas the complete set of drawings and table of offsets from Lytton Hope in England, he took the drawing to a highly skilled builder in Victoria, J.J. Robinson, who had his boat shop located next door to T.C. Jones at the foot of Montreal Street. J.J. Robinson was a shipwright and boat builder, primarily engaged in commercial work. From the information in the drawings that were brought to him, it is highly likely that he would have carved a half model and taken offsets from the half model to set up the molds to build the hull. He was trained at the time when skilled boat builders would build largely by eye, and often, based on their experience, would make alterations in the shape of the half model in the hopes of improving the performance of the next version that they built. The boats illustrated in the photograph are typical of the kind of work he would have had, from small skiffs to lifeboats to large sealing and whaling skiffs such as the one prominently illustrated in the photograph. Several fine examples of J.J. Robinson's work have survived. The sailboat Loon was built in 1920 for a fellow barrister and good friend of W.H. Langley's, Arthur Creese. She too has survived in good condition and is currently tied up at Oak Bay Marina and well maintained by her current owner. He also would do custom work for customers, as evidenced in this beautiful cradle made in the 1870s for a wealthy Victoria family, which is now in the possession of the Maritime Museum of British Columbia. His great-great-granddaughter, Carol Bertram, has photographs of 3 other cradles that are in the possession of her family that were also built by J.J. Robinson. T.C. Jones and his son, D.T. Jones, posing for a photograph at the entrance to their shop at the foot of Montreal Street. They had immigrated from Wales in the late 19th century and set up shop in Victoria. Like J.J. Robinson, they did a lot of commercial work, but also took on yachts as the occasion arose and built very beautiful rowing skiffs. At the time, around 1900, a 14-foot rowing skiff, complete with oars and seat back, would have cost in the neighborhood of $30. D.T. Jones continued to build boats after the death of his father, well into the 1940s. This skiff, Patley, which we owned for many years, was built around 1900 and is completely original except for the small floorboard sets at bow and stern. W.H. Langley purchased a 12-foot skiff from T.C. Jones in 1896, which served as the tender for Dorothy until 1944. The original seat back from Dorothy's skiff was brought into the MMBC's storefront this last summer as a donation with her name and Victoria Yacht Club carved in Gothic script. The first direct approach by W.H. Langley to Linton Hope in England was to inquire about having a Dorothy-type single-handed cruiser built in England and shipped to Victoria. Linton Hope replied on August 6, 1896, that he could build a Dorothy with teak planking, metal fittings, and high-class workmanship for £250. For an additional £15, he would add a copper-plated bottom. Or, if W.H. Langley preferred, he could build a cheaper vessel for £220. At the time, a pound was worth $5. He offered to supply a complete set of drawings for 15 guineas. W.H. Langley must have replied to the previous letter inquiring whether the design fee was included in the cost of the boat. So on September 10, 1896, Linton Hope replies that yes, it was. He then expanded on the previous quotations, detailing everything that would be included and the fact that everything would be built to the highest standard, including a bronze centerboard and a bronze rudder. He also indicated that it would take 3 months to build and would be delivered to either London or Liverpool for shipment to Canada. After the receipt of the previous letter, Langley decided to take the drawings from Dixon Kemp's book to J.J. Robinson and ended up getting a quote including specifications for building Dorothy in Victoria out of local materials for the hull and spars, and with Langley responsible for supplying the centerboard, any iron and brass fittings, the deadlights, the lead keel, sails, etc. The cost per Robinson's part of the contract was $500, with delivery in April of 1897. The keel, stem, and stern posts were to be built of oak or elm. Rowan floor timbers were specified. Oak of suitable size for the frames. Red cedar, 1-inch finished, of suitable widths for the planking. Bolts for the floor, and deadwood fastenings to be of galvanized iron and clenched where required. The skin and frame to be copper fastened. The decks to be of good clear seasoned fir in suitable sizes, and the spars of spruce or red fir. Shortly after confirming the order with Robinson, Langley applied to Lloyd's Register of Yachts in London. The name he submitted was Viola II. If we had a copy of Lloyd's Register of Yachts for 1897, you would find a listing for Viola II belonging to W.H. Langley in Victoria, BC, and giving her specifications. This copy of a page of Lloyd's Register of Yachts from 1912 shows Dorothy listed number 228, and under her name it says X Viola II. He was still intending to call Dorothy Viola II as late as May 6, 1897, as you can see on his estimate of costs and amounts expended for the Dorothy project. Apparently, J.J. Robinson's youngest daughter, who is known as Dorothy, was often at the boatyard while Langley's boat was being built, and it is possible that he decided sometime between May 6th and June 26th to name the boat after her, one of those odd mysteries that we can never be sure about. Not everything needed to fit out Dorothy was available in Victoria. Items such as the portholes and gear for the rigging, pumps, sails, and various sundry items were ordered from England from companies such as Norrie and Wilson. The centerboard required for Dorothy was a 3/8 inch thick, 8-foot long galvanized steel plate, and for some reason it could not be provided in Victoria, and so Langley ordered it from the George W. Gibbs Company in San Francisco on June 24, 1897. It was shipped on the steamer Umatilla of the Pacific Coast Steamship Company, arriving in Victoria on June 30, 1897. The total cost of the centerboard of 385 pounds was $25.09. The shipping cost to Victoria was 54 cents plus 26 cents in Victoria for wharfage, for a grand total of 80 cents. After some delays, Dorothy was finally ready to launch on July 26, 1897. Under the heading of a handsome yacht added to the Victorian squadron, it relates that after being gracefully christened by Mrs. A. J. Weaver Bridgman, the little yacht took the water in a series of lively and pretty leaps. Every credit for the success of the launch, as well as for the excellent work in her construction, is due to her builder, Mr. Robinson. She is, with the exception of some of her fittings, entirely a home production, and as far as appearances go, would certainly indicate that Victoria can class yacht building among other of her other industrial accomplishments. This faded photograph, annotated in W. H. Langley's own hand, is the earliest photograph that we have found up until now. Dorothy is at her mooring across from the yacht club on the left and the legislature on the right, with the James Bay Bridge in the background. She has her sails shipped, and so she's still in commission. So this photograph was probably taken between July 26th and the end of September in 1897, when she would have been stripped down for the winter decommissioning. I believe that this beautiful photo is the earliest sailing picture that we have found to date of Dorothy. She has her gunter rig, so that dates this picture no later than 1901. The mainsail is setting beautifully with no sagging or wrinkling, which is how a new cotton sail would set. Later pictures taken in 1900 show the sail blown out and badly wrinkled, which was quite common for cotton sails in boats that were sailed vigorously, as Langley was wont to do. The two flags at the bottom of the picture are the Victoria Yacht Club flag on the right and Langley's personal flag on the left. It is likely that this frame and photo, or another copy of it, was hung in the main club room of the floating clubhouse of the Victoria Yacht Club in the Inner Harbor, along with similarly styled pictures of boats belonging to other members. This photograph was located in the archives of the City of Vancouver, part of the Major Matthews collection. It's the only photo I've found of the many I've looked at of Dorothy in the Inner Harbor, in which Langley's first yacht, Viola, appears. Viola was sold in the spring of 1897 for $150 and is never heard from again. So it is quite possible that this photograph also was taken in 1897 or possibly 1898, which was the year the Parliament buildings opened. This photograph was taken on a large glass plate negative, and so the file which I purchased from the Vancouver City Archives is actually 0.99 gigabytes in size. It is possible to blow up sections of the photo to show very clear detail of Dorothy. We can see in these crops from the previous photo lots of details about Dorothy that would not be clear in lower resolution photos. The tiller and the rudder stock can be clearly seen. The tiller has the main sheet coiled over it. The cabin doors with their Victorian style hinges and brass lock set. The roller furling, drum, the oddly offset forward hatch, and in the detail photograph of the cabin sides in a further enlargement. You can clearly see the vertical staving of the 1-inch fir tongue and groove that make up the cabin sides. This is an indication of her commercial boat pedigree, as vertical staving was the common method of building cabin sides at the time. In England, the cabin sides would have been made of one piece of hardwood bent to shape. This is a photo of Dorothy taken on July 3, 1900, in the swell off of Point Wilson on the way to Port Townsend for the 4th of July racing. Langley was quite disappointed in the results, as he was beaten by a very strange scow-like craft sailed by 4 enthusiastic young men that capsized twice and still managed to make it to the finish line ahead of him. As you can see, the sails are 3 years old and starting to look a little rough, sagging and wrinkled. This was the last season for the Gunter rig. This was taken from a yacht called Ariel on the same trip, probably near Port Hadlock. What the stripy caps were in aid of is a complete unknown. Again, by cropping some, very clear detail came out, as you can see the tiller and the rudder stock with its brass cap quite clearly. The other thing that is very clear is the large oarlock on the starboard side cockpit combing for keeping some way on when the wind has died completely, although it wouldn't be very helpful against an opposing tide. These are photos of a trip to Nanoose Bay taken in September of 1902. The picture on the left shows Dorothy towing her Jones rowboat, leaving Victoria to head north. It must be a fairly windy day in Juan de Fuca, as part of the mainsail is neatly rolled around the boom. The Gunter rig is gone, to be replaced with a proper straight gaff and a Turner patent furling gear on the boom. The picture on the right depicts Dorothy becalmed, reminiscent of the ancient mariner, as idle as a painted ship upon a painted sea. The other change in 1902 is Dorothy is now sporting the first of several different lengths of bowsprit that were tried over the next 80 years. The bowsprit allowed a larger headsail to be carried and effectively moves the center of effort forward, reducing the considerable weather helm that she would have carried with the Gunter rig. By the 1980s, the sail plan balanced perfectly. These photos show the details of the Turner patent furling gear that Langley purchased from England and fitted to Dorothy's boom in 1902. It is a fine example of late 19th century marine hardware and was a great improvement in sail handling on a small boat with a large mainsail in a seaway. The claw-like fitting is how the mainsheet connected to the boom, allowing the sail to furl easily as the boom was turned by the gear at the gooseneck. The handwritten instructions from the manufacturer provide information on how to fit the gear to a new or existing boom. This is William Langley, age 34, returning from the cruise to Nanoose in September of 1902. In the background is Cape Keppel and Cowichan Bay. Note the oar on the cabin top, and you can see the socket for the oarlock in the combing of the cockpit. A good detailed shot of the cabin doors, which has been very helpful in building the new doors. In 1903, the most significant change in Dorothy's design was made. After consultation with Linton Hope, he decided to remove the troublesome centerboard, whose case was always leaking, and have a heavier ballast keel cast and bolted onto a new piece of deadwood, increasing her draft. This also meant making a new rudder. Lloyd's Register notes the change. This would be a great improvement for sailing in the deep waters of the Salish Sea and would vastly increase the security and comfort aboard. Dorothy won many trophies in her early days. In 1900, on the Queen's birthday, she won the first prize for the B class in a regatta in Victoria. In 1910, the Victoria Yacht Club hosted an international regatta, and a number of American boats came to race against the Canadian yachtsmen, and Dorothy won second place in the B class. The photograph shows the assembled fleet of the International Yacht Race in 1910, with Dorothy near the middle. It is interesting to note that there are no two boats alike. They were all different sizes and different designs, and it must have been quite difficult to do the handicapping. This is a fine and fascinating view of the inner harbor in 1912, taken from the roof of the recently completed Empress Hotel by Fleming Brothers. The harbor is becoming busier each year. There are 9 steamships in view, a big change from the quieter days of Dorothy's arrival on the scene. She is anchored lower front and center, and would require much more careful seamanship to work her way out to open water for an afternoon sail. This photo, also from the Vancouver City Archives from the Major Matthews collection, shows Dorothy fitting out in May 1913 at her mooring in front of the Empress. Whether that is Langley himself painting the cabin top or someone from Robinson's Yard is unknown. When he changed the rig in 1902 from gunter to gaff, he reduced the size of the mainsail. The gooseneck for the gunter rig was just slightly above the cabin top and can be seen in the cropped photo to the right. It is a galvanized double bend just above where he is painting. The new gooseneck can be seen about 18 inches higher, and that is the one she still has today. Her mast is still original after 126 years, and the gaff and boom date from 1902 and are all still in good condition. Also, something that's not apparent in any of the other photographs is the taffrail in front of the mast on the deck for helping to tie off the various halyards and lines from the sails. This will be remade and will be ready when we do the rigging. Another interesting feature is the porthole in the front of the cabin. When the boat arrived in Ladysmith, there was no porthole. The old remaining panel from the forward part of the bulkhead had been put on the back of the cabin's front, and the outside had been covered long ago with plywood and epoxy and fiberglass. Taking the old bulkhead off, here was the perfect cutout for the porthole. I spent a considerable time on the internet and looked at over 2,000 used portholes, hoping to find a Norrie and Wilson porthole to match the 4 original ones. I found one. I was quite excited. I thought, at last. But on checking the measurements, it was the 8-inch version, not the 6-inch version. In the end, we found a very similar porthole made by Davy and Company in London, and that will be installed when the painting of the cabin sides is finished. In the previous slide, we saw someone painting the cabin top on Dorothy. In trying to create the look and feel of Dorothy before the First War, finding out what colors she was painted is important. Fortunately, we have Langley's maintenance log from 1928 to 1944. It is obvious from photographs that she was painted white with white cabin sides and a white cockpit. Her teak trim was varnished. However, the deck and cabin top colors only show up in a black and white photo as darker than the white. In the maintenance log starting in 1928, he refers to the various paints used, starting with international paints like Lagaline No. 7, and moving on to Bapco paint, Martin Senior paint, and Glidden paint, which he refers to as a light buff. But exactly what was this color? After extensive searching on the internet, I could find no color charts for any of the paints referred to, so I wrote to ASCO Nobel in Holland, the current owner of International Paints, and asked if they had any color charts from 1928. Several weeks later, I got a reply from their East Coast Canadian distributor in Halifax with the appropriate color chart, identifying Lagaline No. 7 as light buff. And so now we can paint the cabin top and decks with a similar color and know that we are effectively recreating her look from her early days. This photograph was taken on July 1st, 1914, at the finish line of the Dominion Day Regatta long-distance sailing race in Cowichan Bay. Dorothy is just crossing the finish line and has won first place on corrected time. She was awarded the silver trophy illustrated in the picture on the right, which is in the collection of the Maritime Museum of British Columbia. The races in Cowichan Bay were sponsored by the Cowichan Bay Yacht Club, which had been formed around 1907 by Arthur Lane, and they hosted these regattas until the First World War. They were very popular, and newspaper accounts claim that there were 5,000 people crowding the wharf and shoreline at Cowichan Bay, who had been delivered from all over Vancouver Island by the E&N Railroad and by the CPR steamer, the Princess Sophia. And so we arrive in 1916. Dorothy is at her mooring, resting peacefully, as the First World War rages in Europe. Langley, a captain of the local militia, is about to depart to the front in Europe, joining the thousands of volunteers in Vancouver Island, many of whom never returned. This ends the first stage of her life. She was poorly cared for the next several years and became quite run down and needed a significant refit when the now Major Langley returned in 1919. This is Dorothy as she is today, being refitted yet again in the car shop. The intention is to return her as close to her look and feel at the time before 1914. This is a collaborative effort between the Ladysmith Maritime Society and the Maritime Museum of BC. The project is funded primarily by donations, and anyone interested can contact the museum at https://mmbc.kindful.com/ and select SV Dorothy from the drop-down menu. The work is being done by a fine group of volunteers, and if all goes well, will be launched on May 27th this year. It is very unusual for a boat this old not to have been completely restored. For the first 47 years of her life, she was owned by W.H. Langley, and except for a brief period during the First World War when she was overseas, she was in commission every season and beautifully maintained by the owner himself and with the help of local Victoria shipwrights when major work needed to be done. After she was sold, there were 13 owners, all of whom did the best they could in their own way to maintain and repair her as required and as time and money allowed. Alterations are made, particularly in the interior, to suit the requirements of various owners, but the original fabric of the boat is still largely intact. Roughly 50% of the planking is original. The backbone, except for the top of the stem, which was replaced in 1930, is original. The frames are largely original, and the hull has been reinforced amidships with sister frames. The deck and cabin top are the original tongue and groove boards on the original oak deck beams, and have survived intact due to being covered with plywood, fiberglass, and epoxy in the 1970s. So time and again over her life she has been maintained and repaired, but never stripped down and completely restored, which is what has happened to so many older wooden boats, to the point where often only a very small percentage, if any, of the original boat is left. Thank you all for your interest in this small piece of Vancouver Island's colorful maritime history. Sources that I've used in putting together the story of Dorothy's early days. This is only a fraction of the material I have assembled over the last 10 months. It is invaluable both in understanding her history and in allowing us to recreate the look she had over 100 years ago.